The Ashen World. The world had never seen such devastation. In the span of a single day, everything changed. It began quietly, with the distant rumbling of Mount Etna, followed by the ominous trembling of the earth beneath. At first, no one thought it would amount to much, but soon it was clear. This was no ordinary eruption. The skies darkened as the first clouds of ash and smoke began to rise, blotting out the sun. As days passed, volcanoes all over the world began erupting simultaneously. From the ancient calderas of Indonesia to the fiery peaks of the Pacific Ring of Fire, the earth seemed to be tearing itself apart. The ash clouds grew thick and fast, climbing higher into the stratosphere, blocking out sunlight and plunging the planet into darkness. The temperatures plummeted almost immediately. The once warm days turned cold, and the nights became frigid. Crops began to wither without sunlight, and the air, thick with sulfur and ash, made it nearly impossible to breathe. For those who remained in the path of destruction, life became a constant battle for survival. The global cooling, an event that would later be known as the volcanic winter, had begun. The planet's ecosystems began to collapse. Without sunlight, photosynthesis ceased, and the world's vast forests and fields were reduced to barren wastelands. The oceans turned toxic as acidic rains fell relentlessly, poisoning water supplies and killing marine life. In the cities, panic spread like wildfire. Governments collapsed as communication and transportation systems failed. The world, once so connected by trade and technology, was now fractured, with nations scrambling to adapt to the new, hostile environment. Those who had the means to survive holed up in underground shelters, stockpiling what little food and water remained. But even these havens were not immune to the effects of the global catastrophe. The air became thick with toxic gases, making it almost impossible to breathe. The skies, once blue and clear, were now an eerie shade of gray. Sunlight was a distant memory. Meanwhile, the restless earth continued to tremble. Earthquakes shattered the remnants of civilization, further crippling any chance of recovery. In coastal areas, massive tsunamis, triggered by underwater eruptions, wiped out entire cities, swallowing up entire populations in their wake. The toll of human life was beyond comprehension. The few survivors were left to navigate a world that no longer resembled the one they had known. They scavenged for food in what remained of the cities, fought off marauders, desperate for the same resources, and tried to rebuild in the face of overwhelming odds. But every day was a struggle, and with each passing week, the chances of survival seemed to dwindle. As the years dragged on, the earth began to heal. The volcanic activity slowed, and the skies slowly cleared. But the damage was done. The world was a shadow of its former self. Entire ecosystems were lost, and the human population had been reduced to a fraction of what it once was. Those who remained on Earth now faced the daunting task of rebuilding from the ashes. They found solace in the small victories, new crops sprouting from the fertile volcanic soil, the slow return of wildlife, the gradual clearing of the skies. But there was no going back to the way things were. The cataclysm had reshaped everything. The world, once a thriving, bustling planet, had become a place of survival, where every resource was precious and every day was a fight against the forces of nature. Yet, amid the destruction, a new kind of unity began to emerge. People who had once lived in isolation now found common ground, working together to rebuild what had been lost. They had no choice but to adapt, to find new ways of living in this changed world. In the barren landscapes, survivors began to form new societies. With communication networks down, these communities were small and fragmented, yet deeply interconnected through shared struggles and values. Their survival depended on cooperation, on working with what little the Earth had left to offer. They scoured the remnants of the old world for tools, seeds, and any remaining resources, building a patchwork civilization in the ruins. Technology, once the pinnacle of human progress, had become a distant memory. Most of the machines that had powered the old world were either destroyed or too damaged to function. But those who remained had learned to make do with what they had, relying on ingenuity and basic survival skills. Old methods of farming, crafting, and trading re-emerged. In place of the towering skyscrapers and busy streets, small villages began to form around the few areas of arable land that still remained. Renewable energy, such as wind and solar power, made a slow comeback as survivors sought ways to harness nature's remaining gifts. The technology of the past was being adapted to the present as humans learned to live with less. Yet, even as they adapted, the scars of the catastrophe remained. The landscape was littered with reminders of the old world: collapsed cities, burned forests, rivers once teeming with life, now empty and toxic. The world's population was decimated, and the survivors were burdened with the knowledge that the Earth could never fully return to what it once was. But they had learned a powerful lesson from the apocalypse, that the true strength of humanity lies not in its ability to dominate nature, but in its capacity to adapt, to rebuild, and to persevere. They had weathered the storm, and though they had lost much, they still had each other. As decades passed, the Earth slowly began to heal. Vegetation began to creep back. Animals returned in small numbers, and the once toxic air gradually cleared. The volcanic winter eventually ended, though the world had changed irreversibly. What remained was a humbler, more cautious species, one that had learned the hard way how fragile life could be. The survivors, weary but resolute, now turned their attention to the future. They knew it would take generations to rebuild, but the seeds of hope were planted. The harsh environment they faced had forced them to evolve, not just as individuals, but as a species. They had discovered the power of collaboration and the importance of sustainable living. They no longer took the Earth for granted, for they understood its delicate balance, and they knew that every choice they made could tip that balance. Across the planet, small groups of survivors formed larger networks, and from the ashes of the old world, the foundations of a new one began to take shape. They traded knowledge, seeds, and technologies that had survived, exchanging what little they had for the promise of a better tomorrow. But this time, it wasn't about progress for the sake of progress. The new world was to be built carefully, mindfully, with respect for the Earth and for each other. As the years turned into centuries, humanity started to flourish once again, but this time in harmony with nature. The Earth, though scarred, had proven to be resilient, and humanity, having learned from its darkest hour, was no longer a species driven solely by greed and ambition, but by a shared sense of responsibility to protect the planet that had given them life. And as the first flowers bloomed in the fields, as the air became clean once more, the survivors understood that this was not just a rebirth of the Earth, but of humanity itself. For they knew now, more than ever, that survival wasn't just about enduring, but about living with purpose, living with respect, and living in balance. This extended continuation further explores the slow but hopeful process of rebuilding, emphasizing humanity's evolving relationship with nature. The survivors are now focused on sustainability, cooperation, and using their hard-earned wisdom to create a new, more harmonious world.